Thank you for staying with us. We'll continue to look at the processes over the weekend in the elections in Kogi, Imo, and Bayelsa State. And we have here in the studio Mr. Austin Aigbe, a member International Public Service Association, Alumni Africa Leadership Forum, and Alumni Global Social Change Leadership Institute, New York. Thank you for joining us, Mr. Aigbe.
Thank you very much. I appreciate it.
Also here we have Samson Itodo, Executive Director, Yaga Africa. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, and good morning.
I scribbled something here, assessing the processes. We've had two guests already talk to us about the Imo elections, and we've heard from our correspondent, Lambe, the outlook one day after the elections in Kogi State. And it looks as everything is calm in Kogi, but a lot of people within the city center were, apparently they went to the hinterland to do their voting, and they are yet to return. But between the both of you being election observers, let's hear what your take is as regards to the elections over the weekend. Stay to it.
Well, I thought Austin was going to. No, I think that this, and just speaking to the process, that the process was a setback on many fronts. We had just come out of a general election that was contentious and controversial. And then this was an off-cycle election. That was a litmus test for different institutions. And Nigeria had an opportunity to rebuild public confidence in the electoral process. And the way and manner this election has gone, and speaking specifically to the process, it does fall short of that expectation that elections will deliver, and inspire public confidence for a lot of reasons. The first, when you look at the whole context for this election, I think one thing that we must acknowledge is the fact that compared to 2019, at least for Kogi State, compared to 2019, the amount of violence that we experienced in 2019 wasn't the case in 2023. So it means that the security agencies and all the pre-election intervention did produce a safe environment for people to cast their vote. Because in 2019, this conversation we're having today wasn't the conversation in 2019 because of the level of violence across board. So that's on one level. The second is with respect to election logistics. And specifically, you look at both Bayelsa and look at Imo and also Kogi, you discover that the level of opening of polls and deployment of materials are quite varied. So in Kogi, you had early commencement and early arrival of INEC officials. To a large extent, when it comes to deployment, there wasn't any significant challenge with the deployment of election materials, in states like Kogi. Of course, Bayelsa we expected, and then Imo, there was slow start in some locations. Thirdly, is the availability of election materials. And to a large extent, in over 80% of polling units, go close to 90, there are just a few issues where you had shortages of ballot papers. But I think that when it came to deployment of materials, there was a measure of improvement. So all these do have an implication. But when you look at the general assessment of the management of the process, there are several questions that beg for answer. The first one relates to this, issue about, the compromise of the result sheets prior to commencement of accreditation and voting, not just in Kogi State, but also in Imo, where result sheets were pre-filled and they were deployed to the polling unit. And this particular incident, I think the country as a whole need to rise in condemning this incident, but also ensuring that people go to jail. for this criminal act. Not just the perpetrators, but also their sponsors. Because it's just unacceptable that pre-filled result sheets will show up at the polling. I can't remember in recent time when in an election, results sheets will be completed and then just deployed to the polling. It has been a thing of the past. But the fact that we are experiencing that in 2023, we should be worried with this development. The second relates to when you look at a state like Imo, and we've looked at all the results, on the IREV, and there are several integrity questions. It is just unacceptable with the kind of results that you see on IREV and the EC8As, being used to collate results. We've raised issues at the Aigbe Africa that based on, the PRVT that we deployed, there were some polling units where elections did not hold. Now, INEC needs to clarify what happened to the fate of the voters in those polling units. And how come that for some of those polling units, result sheets were uploaded on the IREV for those polling units? I think there's some explanations that INEC needs to provide to Nigerians. But there are also issues about the BVAS and how there was BVAS bypass. We also observed that in some locations, not just in Imo, that BVAS, was bypassed. These are critical issues that INEC needs to investigate, and the law is very clear. It's got about 7 days to review declarations or returns that were made. I hope that the actors, will follow the procedure for registering grievance or complaints with INEC, and we wait to see the action that INEC will take. At least in this election, INEC improved its responsiveness to some of these issues that were raised. And when citizens, and raised the issue about pre-filled result sheets, INEC responded, investigated, communicated, but then we are awaiting the actions that will be taken against those polling officials. And for me, the last critical issue, and we raised this issue in the last couple of days, about the integrity of the people who manage our elections. And at the end of the day, it boils down to the personal integrity. But these acts are totally unacceptable, and they are highly condemnable, and it does not put us on the path of rebuilding public confidence in the post-2023 era.
Awesome. Well, I sorry to interrupt you. I mean, Samson has laid down a litany of issues, some of them positive. I'm talking about violence and the fact that the conversation we're having now is not what we're having in 2019, especially with regards to Kogi. But then when you also look at all the other issues, is mentioned election logistics, integrity of the people who manage polls, pre-filled election result sheets, etc. It raises big questions. I mean, on Saturday, you were here with us and we're talking about what was happening in the 3 elections. And I know that one of the things you're talking about is the playbook of rigging. The rigging playbook. You imagined that, the era of pre-filled election result sheets had been expunged from the playbook, but sadly it looks like maybe it was only taken to the back page. It has now been brought back somewhere in the middle. Austin, I'm sure you're looking at all that has transpired, and I also know that you will also have your own litany. But I want you to intervene in the area of technology, because it was one of the areas that held a promise for us with the introduction of BVAS, and INEC saying that in places where there was no accreditation, there will be no voting. People have complained that there are many places where no accreditation took place and voting results were declared. In fact, someone said that's what will give someone the impetus to bring pre-filled result sheets to a polling unit. Maybe they knew something we didn't know about the use of technology. So, from what you know about how technology has been deployed in these elections, the BVAS and also the use of the IREV, has it really made any difference to the conduct of our elections?
Thank you very much. Those questions are like post-jump questions. First is that I like the way Samson did summarize the entire electoral architecture. He was talking, and my mind went to 2007. Elections are going on, and declarations are made. Elections, voting is still ongoing in polling units, far away in Ughelli, somewhere in Ughelli, far away somewhere in Benin, and the president of Nigeria was returned in 2007. Why? Because at that time, it was entirely manual processes. And results are it's a little bit very difficult to follow numbers. And gradually, by 2011, there was this, what they call the permanent voters card, even though we didn't use it. It was both the temporary that was used together and all of the problems that happened in 2011. Then we moved to 2015. There was a bit of an upscale because of technology. I'm just trying to do an historical context to technology. In 2015, for the first time in our election landscape, there was this smart card reader. And even though it was criticized, but people said, no, don't criticize it. We will need to build on it and gradually see how we move ahead of time. Even though at some point in that election in 2015, the BVAS was suspended and a lot of things happened, which of course brought some questions.
The smart card reader,
sorry, the smart card reader. So now back to the new age, the BVAS. We sincerely, every civil society member, in fact, every citizen of Nigeria that went through the BVAS before 2023 elections, will say that, we have come of age. We need to just keep improving this. Elections previously, even in the very violent, supposedly violent location in Anambra State, BVAS went on well. And it was so clear that you could go to the IRF and you look at the results. And let me quickly state that the issue of IRF is not new. It dates back to an offset small election in Nasarawa where that gradually snowballed to what is now known as IRF. And it's becoming like the biggest of all. Ekiti, Osun State, the biggest. You didn't need to do a number of things. Citizens, once you're done with your voting, go to your IRF point, check your own result that you saw in your polling unit, and then confirm whether it's the same. And that was the whole law that brought about integrity. That citizens could have confidence in the process. The thing is about confidence in the process. Trust deficit. There was a high level of trust. And that was the signal sent to 2023 elections. If we could have all of this upscale from the previous elections, then we are good to go with 2023. And all of the sentiment that went to the election, all of the statement, annex statement, duly signed, publicity that went on, that without BVAS accreditation, no electronic accreditation, no voting. But we later saw, like Samson said, and everybody said, and also I've said before, previously, the 2023 election brought a lot of questions. Now, with the conclusion of the 2023 elections, conclusion based on court proceedings and all, it is now obvious that what is called BVAS, even though INEC went on in Anambra, in Imo, Bayelsa, and Kogi, that the BVAS will be used. I didn't have faith in it because of the pronouncement that INEC does have a final say. Now INEC's final say is clear, declaring this candidate winner, realizing that there are issues with the system leading to the declaration. Okay, and that's where the problem is.
Awesome. Just hold your thoughts there. We will take a moment. We'll come back so that you tidy up this, because obviously you're good, you're on a roll. We'll be back in a moment. Do stay with us. Welcome back. We still have Austin Aigbe and Samson Itodo here. Austin, you were on the roll about the processes, and you were talking about the technology. That's a question mark I asked you. The technology that had been introduced, BVAS, IREV, and all of that.
As I was saying, in some of these states, particularly in Imo, where you have almost 95% upload, as at yesterday, you will expect that
97, right?
97 now. you will expect that, wow, this is exciting. That was what we were looking for in the 2023 elections, that the uploads were poor. Now the people, like you talked about the playbook, we now know that if you go to court and you present evidence from IREF, it does not stand any legal backing.
Sorry, 93%.
93% now. Okay, maybe it dropped because as of yesterday, okay, maybe I can't remember, but it was 90-something% as of yesterday evening. So you see, the people know, those who manipulate this process know that nobody will have the time to look at all of these results one by one. But unknown to them, there are individuals who will actually look at it. Even when you don't look at all, you may just do, you may scan. And there are some of those scannings you scan that embarrasses you. How can a candidate of a total number of people registered to vote, a candidate is getting almost all the numbers? How? Where is it done? We are just back to 2007, where we now know that even if you upload results on IREF, you can make all the noise on IREF, they are going to ask you, where is the Form EC8A? Where is the Form EC8A? Why are you talking about IREF? Did you not know that you're supposed to deploy your party agents to the area? Did you not know? This is the conversation we had in 2023 elections, that you don't need to use IREF to argue your case in court. Those technicalities are now being properly now used in Kogi, Bayelsa, and Imo. I don't know about Bayelsa because some of these stories are not really coming from Bayelsa. I don't know the strength of Bayelsa with the level of integrity. But to say that upload of result is now a validity, it's no longer true. But it also brings question. Because in Adamawa global elections, IREF was used to correct the imbalance. The commission utilized, they actually went through by pulling out the data to make a formal declaration. But now, we are in a place where the guys have been told, don't worry. In fact, Samson was talking about violence in Kogi. In my subconsciousness, why do you need to take guns to street when you can write the results? You don't need guns anymore. What you need is to get the people to say, okay, take this result, go there, nothing. We are behind you. So there's no need to shoot guns anymore. So the process is peaceful because the fraud is now on a high scale. If those individuals were not caught, which of course, maybe I'm not a saint, but at least in my supposition, like proposal, the moment you see one is enough to suspend the process and investigate before moving on. It's an integrity question. Result sheets are very sensitive materials of INEC. They are likely the last to be deployed. How did it get to the point that you pre-fill them? You actually send them to the feed. As at this time, these individuals were not talking about IREF. Just know this. IREF was not on their mind. Their mind was on Form EC8A because that's what the court will use. So whatever you see on IREF is immaterial because what came from the polling unit become valid. So forget IREF, forget Beavers, and that's why they bypassed it. They recognize that you don't need, because at the end of the day, people are going to shout that the result sheet is 500 registered voters, maybe 400 turn out to vote, and maybe party A got 10, 20 like that. On IREF, it will be different. So you don't need to do that. Don't put us under pressure. So there will be no need for violence anymore.
So tell us then, Samson, I mean, what great influence, what import did the Supreme Court judgment have for these elections? Because you were saying that the pattern that we're seeing draws largely from what the political actors, perceive the Supreme Court to have said. We do know that in our laws, yes, the IREF might not be there explicitly, but the Beavers is recognized in our laws. So even if someone is excusing the use of IREF, which functioned, by the way, this time around in these elections, how can someone bypass the Beavers, which is recognized? I mean, the Beavers is not mentioned, but INEC is allowed to use a technological device to accredit voters. How does anybody justify that? Is that what the Supreme Court said?
Well, so let's decouple this issue. And first, what was the original conception of these new technologies that INEC introduced. The BVAS is a device, the IREV is a portal. The BVAS was introduced to deepen the integrity of the voter verification process, the accreditation process. And why? Because we've had cases of multiple voting by proxy. And so this whole accreditation process was introduced to limit, electoral malpractice. And then its other function is to take image of the result sheets and upload. The whole discussion was Nigerians clamored for transmission of election results. Because there are two distinct things. Collation and transmission are different things. Transmission is the movement of results from one point to another. And then collation is totaling and adding up all the results. That process of collation, is manual. What Nigerians have thought and what they were meant to believe was that results will be transmitted electronically, to a particular center, and then it will be visible. But then, the design of the entire process was mainly for upload. So people and Nigerians, and we all thought that, yes, this device was going to be for electronic transmission because it's important to listen to the language that has come from both INEC. There's a fundamental difference between upload and transmission of results. But if you check the Electoral Act, it gives INEC the discretionary powers to do what? To manage the results, collation, and transmission process. INEC, in furtherance of that particular power, designed in its guidelines and clearly prescribes the process. And it is clearly articulated in INEC guidelines, the process of transmitting results, which includes using the BVAS. They go to the court, and the court says that the implication is, what the court says that there is a hierarchy in our laws. And there are only two major cardinal pillars of our electoral legal framework, the Constitution and the Electoral Act. So if INEC guidelines prescribe electronic transmission, it is unknown to law because the guidelines is not part of our electoral legal frameworks. And it begs to question, if the law says INEC can issue guidelines, and INEC issues guidelines pursuant to the law that gives it the power, it then means that that guideline does have the force of law. But the Supreme Court have consistently downgraded, the guidelines. And so everything contained in the guidelines, if it's contested in court, the court will say, no, but it's unknown. It has to be clearly stated in the Electoral Act. And so they clearly said that the IREV is not a collation center because it is unknown to law. And so I totally agree with Austin. All the results that are on the IREV cannot be tendered in court because they do not have any form of legality. And the Supreme Court also noted that the failure to transmit presidential election results to the IREV did impact on public confidence. There's a fundamental difference between, what has legality and also what inspires, public confidence. And the IREV, as at today, only exists to promote transparency. It does not have any legal implication based on the interpretation of the Supreme Court. But in our view, if it is stated in INEC guidelines, and those guidelines are made pursuant to the constitutional powers vested in INEC, then you don't need to clearly prescribe that, because your law already says the procedure for voting and transmission of results shall be determined by the Electoral Commission. The Electoral Commission says, okay, we have this power. We have now determined the procedure, and this is it in our guidelines. You turn around and say, no, It has to be clearly stated in the Electoral Act. And the point needs to be made. And I feel really sad as a Nigerian. And I know there are many Nigerians out there that this innovative technology that INEC introduced to our electoral process to deepen the integrity of our process has now become the tool used to undermine, to assault, and also impede on the credibility of our process. You can clearly see from this election that politicians are not just trying to make a mockery of technology. They have really succeeded in impugning on the credibilities of this technology. And it's going to take us a lot of work to rebuild public confidence in both the beavers as well as the IRF. And I hope that our legislators are following this entire process. Because when an opportunity for reform actually comes, we need to safeguard these technologies. The more we continually have human interference in our process, you're going to have compromised processes. And I hope that, as a nation, we rise up to protect the beavers as well as the IRF, because these technologies will help. Look at this pre-filled and pre-filled results. And then you talk about beavers. You look at the accreditation figures. I just hope that the stakeholders out there need to know, in case they're preparing to go to court, that the court has held that the primary source of accreditation is the beavers. Even if the IRF has a different figure, even if you spot an inconsistency with the accreditation figure on the IRF and what's on the result sheet, at the end of the day, it's the accreditation figure on the beavers that will be because as a primary source of accreditation, that's what the court is going to use in determining whatever dispute that comes before it.
Okay, so at least it will look like there's one leg recognized, there's the other leg that is not recognized. Let's quickly go to Lagos now. Ayo has a question for gentlemen here.
Well, thank you, Maokwe. I just wanted to quickly confirm, Mr. Itodo, and maybe if you can do this within 60 seconds. I remember that the predecessor to the Beavers is a smart card reader at the time, and which the Supreme Court, of course, ruled on, which informed the adjustments made to the law to recognize the electronic devices in our electioneering process. So how is that case of the smart card reader at the time, which wasn't recognized by law, any different from this one now, which is recognized by law, but we still have, as you said, the manual process? Do we have to eliminate the manual process entirely for the electronic process to have sound footing?
No, and let's be clear what the Supreme Court, and just when you talk about the smart card readers, the biggest debate or legal dispute was in relation to the accreditation figures used in determining overvoting. And so what the Supreme Court said was that you cannot supplant the register of voters with the data generated from the smart card reader for accredited voters to determine overvoting. And therefore, you need to amend the law to provide for electronic accreditation. And that's clearly spelled out, in the Electoral Act, whether you use smart card reader or any other technological device. The arguments that the Supreme Court is making is that if you want electronic transmission of results, if you want legality on the IRF, it needs to be stated in the law, in the Electoral Act, and not just in the guidelines. Because the Act clearly prescribes the process for collation, and it's largely manual. It talks about the levels of collation. It talks about the persons that are statutorily responsible for collating results and also making declarations. So those provisions also needs to be amended, to cater for electronic forms of transmission based on the interpretation of the Supreme Court, which I totally don't agree with. And so you need to amend those relevant sections of the law.
So it goes back to
someone who's worked on elections, I don't think that
sorry, Mr. Itodo.
We should substitute the manual process.
Well, why not? Because just as it will be like we're trying to achieve the same thing in two different ways. For instance, look at the length of time it takes for people to move from one local government to the major collation center for this election that we're talking about now. So if it was possible to electronically transmit, not just upload, transmit the elections, the results into a portal that will upload and automatically add up, what's the big deal? Isn't that what happens in the United States, which presidential system we're copying?
Well, Ayo, you and I know that technologies have their vulnerabilities, and so you can't rely 100% on electronic transmission of results. There's nowhere in Africa where the results management system is wholly or solely based on technology. Most systems across the world, especially in Africa, are hybrid systems. And so you need not just audit trail, but if you have situations where, you know, devices break down or there are vulnerabilities like hacks and attacks, how do you remedy that? This is why we need to have both the manual and the electronic, and both of them interfacing with each other with the same or commensurate level of legality. What you currently have is that the manual process is more recognized within the Electoral Act as opposed to the electronic process. And we need both of them to have a handshake so you have a backup in the event that the electronic system does fail.
Well, Austin, I'm going to be quickly getting your wrapping up words. I know you have to run. So based on what we've seen in these elections in Kogi, Imo, and Bayelsa, it's not clear whether or not the parties are going to be going to court or whether or not they're going to be accepted. So far, they've been kicking against what has been declared, especially in Kogi and Imo. But let me ask you, what changes we should be looking forward to as a result of what we've seen transpire?
I think that's the question that Ayo asked. What we need to do right now, there is no electronic transmission of result right now. Mm-hmm. It is just one piece of it, just for integrity purpose, for upload of result on the IRF, for people to see the results that they saw in their polling unit and then see it online and try to just have some confidence. That's the only thing that is happening. There is no transmission from electronic transmission from the polling unit to the ward. It doesn't exist. It's still a manual process. I agree with Samson. We cannot have digital piece all through the way. For example, just party A, 20, party B, that can easily be automated. But what we can do, it is difficult to alter a PDF file. Continue with the PDF file. These results are uploaded on the IRF. Once you get to the polling unit, go with your manual process. Once you get to the collation center, the digital piece uploaded is also being at the ward collation level. So what that means is that if the presiding officer get to the polling ward collation point, as he's calling out the figures, it is displayed the one already uploaded. It has to agree. If there's disagreement, you drop it immediately. In any case, how can there even be disagreement? Usually what happens to disagreement is where there are errors at the polling unit. Once you get to the ward collation point, the ward collation officer said, I won't accept this result because it is not agreed. The data are not tallying. For example, if they gave you 500 ballot papers and you use 200, you should have 300 remaining. And he wants to see the 300, that you have to hand it over. So that process, we need to match it up together. So we are all moving up together. So the fear of not uploading in the 2023 elections, particularly with the presidential, not the others, it sent a very strong message. And Samson said legislators hope they will listen. The benefactors of this whole thing are the ones who want to change it? I don't know. But they do hold Nigeria. I think the president has also mentioned that, whether it's fake news, I don't know, that a better electoral system will be given to Nigeria. And we hope that the president will truly come up to say, well, whatever has happened, maybe you need to speak like Musa Yaradua of blessed memory. Whatever has happened. We need to put system in place. Can we get stakeholders together? Let's find a pathway to ensure credibility of election. And I have proposed earlier, even if electronic transmission of result is cheaper, it will reduce the cost of control elections in Nigeria.
All right.
We are spending too much on elections in Nigeria. Too much.
Thank you so much. Austin Aigbe is a member of International Public Service Association and an alumni of the Africa Leadership Forum and alumni Global Social Change Leadership Institute, New York. Thank you so much. We also had here Executive Director, Yaga Africa, Mr. Samson Itodo. Thank you both, gentlemen.
Thank you very much.